What happens when Hollywood's most beloved laid-back actor finally reaches his breaking point? You won't believe what unfolds when Owen Wilson sits down with Jimmy Kimmel for what was supposed to be a routine promotional interview, only to witness one of the most explosive confrontations in late-night television history. The night that changed everything started innocently enough, but by the time the cameras stopped rolling, social media was ablaze, and Jimmy Kimmel's reputation was hanging by a thread. Before we get into this incredible story, make sure you hit that subscribe button and drop a comment below, because you're not going to believe what unfolds when these two Hollywood figures go head-to-head in a battle that nobody saw coming. The studio audience erupted in their usual enthusiastic applause as Owen Wilson made his entrance onto the Jimmy Kimmel live stage, flashing that signature crooked smile and giving his characteristic wave. Dressed in a casual navy blazer over a simple white t-shirt, Wilson looked relaxed and ready for what everyone assumed would be another light-hearted celebrity chat. The audience's energy was infectious, and Wilson seemed genuinely pleased to be there, taking a moment to acknowledge the crowd before settling into the guest chair opposite Kimmel's desk. "Owen Wilson, everybody," Kimmel announced with his trademark grin, gesturing toward his guest as the applause began to die down. "Thanks for being here, man. You look great. You look relaxed. I heard you just got back from a surfing trip in Hawaii?" Wilson nodded, that familiar laid-back drawl already evident as he responded, Yeah, it was incredible, Jimmy. Really needed to get away from all the craziness, you know? Just me, the waves, and some serious vitamin D. Nothing beats that Pacific Ocean sunrise when you're out there on your board at dawn." "That sounds amazing," Kimmel replied, though there was something slightly off about his tone, a subtle edge that the audience couldn't quite place yet. "Must be nice to have that kind of freedom, that luxury. Not everyone gets to just disappear to Hawaii whenever they feel like escaping reality." Wilson's eyebrows raised slightly at the comment, but he maintained his easygoing demeanor. "Well, I mean, I work pretty hard, Jimmy. We all do in this business. Sometimes you need to recharge, reset your perspective. I'm sure you understand that." The conversation continued for several minutes, with Kimmel asking about Wilson's latest projects and upcoming films. But keen observers in the audience began to notice something brewing beneath the surface. Kimmel's questions carried an increasingly sharp undertone, and his usual playful banter seemed to have a bite to it that wasn't typically present during celebrity interviews. "So tell me about your new movie," Kimmel said, leaning back in his chair with his arms crossed. "Another comedy where you play the lovable, slightly confused guy who somehow wins in the end? I mean, isn't that basically every Owen Wilson movie?" The studio audience shifted uncomfortably. This wasn't the usual gentle ribbing that guests expected on late-night talk shows. Wilson's smile faltered for just a moment before he recovered, though his response carried a hint of defensiveness. "I think that's a pretty reductive way to look at it, Jimmy. I try to bring something different to each role, find the humanity in these characters. Comedy is actually one of the hardest things to do well, and I take it seriously." Kimmel let out a short laugh that didn't reach his eyes. "Oh, I'm sure it's very challenging," saying wow in different inflections and looking perpetually surprised. "That must require years of method acting training." The tension in the room was now palpable. Wilson's jaw tightened almost imperceptibly, and he leaned forward slightly in his chair. The audience had gone quiet, sensing that something was very wrong with this interview. "You know what, Jimmy? I came here tonight to talk about my work and connect with your audience, not to be insulted on national television. What's your deal, man?" But Kimmel wasn't backing down. If anything, Wilson's pushback seemed to embolden him. His eyes narrowed as he prepared to escalate things even further, setting the stage for what would become one of the most shocking moments in late-night television history. "My deal?" Kimmel's voice took on a mocking tone as he leaned forward, his elbows resting on his desk. "My deal is that I'm tired of pretending that what you do is some kind of art form. You've been coasting on the same shtick for 20 years, Owen, the whole surfer dude philosopher thing stopped being charming about 15 movies ago. The audience was now dead silent, the usual laughter and applause completely absent. Wilson's face had gone from confused to genuinely hurt, and then to something much more dangerous: anger. His hands gripped the arms of his chair as he processed. What was happening? "Are you serious right now?" Wilson's voice remained controlled, but there was steel beneath the surface. "I've been doing this for decades, Jimmy. I've worked with some of the greatest directors in Hollywood, created characters that people connect with, made films that have brought joy to millions of people. What exactly have you contributed to the world besides cheap shots and manufactured controversy?" Kimmel's laugh was sharp and humorless. "Oh, that's rich coming from you. At least I don't hide behind a carefully crafted persona. You want to talk about manufactured? Your entire career is based on playing the same character over and over again. The quirky outsider who stumbles through life but somehow always lands on his feet. It's not authentic, Owen. It's calculated." "Calculated?" Wilson's voice rose slightly, his famous calm finally beginning to crack. "You think my career has been calculated? I've taken risks. I've done indie films. I've worked with my friends to create something meaningful. What risks have you taken, Jimmy? Sitting behind this desk every night making jokes written by a team of writers?" The confrontation was escalating rapidly, and both men seemed to have forgotten they were on live television. Kimmel's face had flushed red, and his usual television-friendly demeanor had completely evaporated. "At least I'm honest about what I do," Kimmel shot back. "I don't pretend to be some deep philosophical artist. I make jokes, I entertain people, and I don't act like I'm changing the world with my profound insights about life. You, on the other hand, have built an entire brand around being this zen, laid-back guru. But we all know it's just another performance." Wilson stood up abruptly, his chair rolling backward slightly. The sudden movement caused a ripple of gasps from the audience, and several cameras quickly adjusted to capture the full scope of what was unfolding. "You don't know anything about me," Wilson said, his voice now carrying real heat. "You don't know what I've been through, what I've overcome, or what my work means to the people who connect with it. All you know is how to tear people down from your little throne here. Is this what success looks like to you, Jimmy? Ambushing guests who come here in good faith?" Kimmel wasn't finished. If anything, Wilson's emotional response seemed to fuel his aggression even more. He leaned back in his chair with a smirk that made the entire studio audience uncomfortable. "Oh, here we go with the victim routine. Poor Owen Wilson, the misunderstood artist. Give me a break. You've made millions playing the same character, and now you want to lecture me about integrity? At least when I'm fake, I admit it." The words hung in the air like a toxic cloud, and for a moment the entire studio seemed frozen in time. Wilson's face went through a series of emotions: hurt, disbelief, and finally, a cold fury that transformed his entire demeanor. This was no longer the laid-back actor that audiences knew and loved. This was someone who had been pushed too far, and the volcanic eruption was just beginning. "You know what, Jimmy?" Wilson's voice was now dangerously quiet, each word measured and deliberate. "I came here tonight because I thought we were friends. I've been on your show before. We've laughed together, shared stories. But this isn't friendship. This isn't even professional. This is just cruel." He took a step closer to Kimmel's desk, and the host visibly tensed. The cameras captured every micro-expression, every shift in body language as the confrontation reached a fever pitch. "You want to talk about fake?" Wilson continued, his voice gaining strength. "Let's talk about how you sit here night after night, pretending to be America's sweetheart, the everyman host who's just like his audience. But behind closed doors, you're nothing but a bully with a platform. How many other guests have you ambushed like this? How many people have sat in this chair and left feeling humiliated because it makes for good television?" The audience was now completely silent. some people looking genuinely uncomfortable as they witnessed this unprecedented breakdown of the typical talk show format. Several audience members could be seen whispering to each other, and at least one person appeared to be recording with their phone despite the show's strict policies. Kimmel's confidence seemed to waver for the first time all evening. Wilson's words had clearly struck a nerve, and his usual quick comeback repertoire seemed to have abandoned him. But instead of backing down or attempting to defuse the situation, he doubled down on his aggression. "Oh, please," Kimmel said, though his voice lacked the conviction it had carried earlier. "Don't try to turn this around on me. You're the one who can't handle a little honest criticism. Maybe if you'd challenged yourself artistically instead of playing it safe your entire career, you wouldn't be so sensitive about it." That was the breaking point. Wilson's composure finally shattered completely, and what happened next would be replayed on social media thousands of times before the night was over. "Honest criticism?" Wilson's voice exploded across the studio. "You call this honest criticism? This is character assassination, Jimmy. You invited me here under false pretenses so you could tear me apart for your own entertainment. And you want to talk about playing it safe? You've been telling the same Trump jokes for 8 years. At least I try to evolve." The intensity of Wilson's outburst sent shockwaves through the studio. Even the production crew, normally invisible, in the background could be seen exchanging concerned glances and speaking urgently into their headsets. This was clearly territory that no one had prepared for. Kimmel's face had gone from red to pale, and for a moment he seemed genuinely rattled by the force of Wilson's response. But instead of attempting to salvage the situation or apologize, he made the fatal mistake of trying to regain control through more aggression. "You know what, Owen? Maybe this is exactly what people needed to see. The real you. Not the Zen master act, not the philosophical surfer dude, but the angry, bitter actor who can't handle the truth about his mediocre career." The words hit Wilson like a physical blow, and something fundamental shifted in his demeanor. His hands clenched into fists at his sides, and for a terrifying moment, it looked like the confrontation might become physical. The security personnel positioned around the studio subtly moved closer, ready to intervene if necessary. "Mediocre?" Wilson's voice was barely above a whisper, but it carried more menace than any shout could have. "You want to see mediocre? Jimmy, look in the mirror. Look at what you've become. A bitter, jealous man who tears down others to make himself feel relevant." The studio had become a pressure cooker, and everyone present could feel that they were witnessing something that would have lasting consequences far beyond this single night. Wilson took another step forward, now standing directly in front of Kimmel's desk, towering over the seated host. The power dynamic had completely shifted, and Kimmel, for the first time all evening, looked genuinely intimidated by what he had unleashed. "You know what the real tragedy is here, Jimmy?" Wilson's voice carried a deadly calm that was somehow more terrifying than his earlier outburst. "I actually respected you once. I thought you were one of the good guys in this business. But tonight, you've shown everyone exactly who you really are. A small, petty man who gets his kicks from humiliating people who trusted him enough to sit in that chair." The cameras continued rolling, capturing every second of this unprecedented breakdown. In the control room, producers were frantically debating whether to cut to commercial, but the sheer magnitude of what was happening made it impossible to look away. This was television history in the making, and everyone knew it. Kimmel finally found his voice again, but it came out strained and defensive. "You're being ridiculous, Owen. This is what talk shows are about. Honest conversation, a little back and forth. If you can't handle that, maybe you shouldn't be doing interviews." "Honest conversation?" Wilson let out a bitter laugh that echoed through the silent studio. "There's nothing honest about what you've done here tonight. You ambushed me, Jimmy. You brought me here under the pretense of promoting my work, and instead you've spent the entire time trying to destroy me for sport. That's not honest. That's sadistic." The audience was now visibly uncomfortable, with many people shifting in their seats and whispering among themselves. Several audience members had their phones out despite the strict no-recording policy, sensing that they were witnessing something that would be talked about for years to come. Kimmel's usual composure was completely gone now. His face was flushed, his hands were shaking slightly, and he seemed to realize that he had made a catastrophic error in judgment. But instead of attempting to defuse the situation with an apology or explanation, he made one final desperate attempt to regain control. "Look, Owen, maybe we got a little heated here, but that's just television. Tomorrow everyone will have forgotten about this, and we'll all move on. Why don't you sit back down and we can finish the interview like professionals?" The condescending tone of Kimmel's suggestion was the final straw. Wilson's entire body tensed, and when he spoke, his voice cut through the studio like a blade. "Professionals?" The word dripped with contempt. "A professional doesn't ambush his guests. A professional doesn't use his platform to bully people. A professional shows basic human decency and respect. You've shown none of those things tonight, Jimmy." Wilson began backing away from the desk, his eyes never leaving Kimmel's face. The host seemed to sense that he was losing his guest entirely, and panic began to creep into his expression. "Owen, come on, don't be like this. Sit back down. Let's talk this through. We're both adults here." But Wilson was already shaking his head, his mind clearly made up. The damage had been done, and there was no coming back from what had transpired. The audience watched in stunned silence as one of Hollywood's most beloved actors prepared to do something that had never happened before in the history of late-night television. "You know what, Jimmy? I'm done. I'm done with this conversation. I'm done with this show. And I'm done pretending that what you've done here tonight is acceptable in any way." Wilson reached up and unclipped his microphone, the small gesture somehow carrying enormous weight in the context of everything that had happened. The sound of the mic pack hitting the floor seemed to echo through the studio like a gunshot. "This isn't entertainment, Jimmy. This is cruelty. And I won't be a part of it." The studio erupted in chaos as Wilson turned his back on Kimmel and began walking toward the exit, leaving behind a host who finally seemed to understand the magnitude of what he had done. "Owen, wait!" Kimmel called out desperately, his voice cracking with what might have been genuine remorse. But Wilson didn't even pause, his stride purposeful and determined as he made his way across the stage. The audience watched in stunned silence, many with their mouths agape at witnessing something completely unprecedented in late-night television history. As Wilson reached the edge of the stage, he turned back one final time, his face a mask of disappointment and disgust. "You had a choice tonight, Jimmy. You could have been a decent human being, a professional host, someone who lifts people up instead of tearing them down. Instead, you chose to be cruel for the sake of entertainment. That says everything anyone needs to know about who you really are." The words hung in the air like a final judgment, and Kimmel visibly flinched as if he'd been physically struck. Wilson then disappeared behind the curtain, leaving the studio in absolute pandemonium. Audience members were on their feet, some applauding Wilson's dignity, others seeming confused and upset by what they had witnessed. Kimmel sat frozen at his desk, his face pale and his hands trembling as the full weight of what had transpired began to sink in. The usual smooth television magic had completely evaporated, replaced by raw, uncomfortable reality that no amount of editing could fix. The cameras kept rolling, capturing every second of his humiliation as he struggled to find words. "Ladies and gentlemen," Kimmel finally managed to stammer, his voice barely audible. "We're going to take a quick commercial break." But his attempt at maintaining control fell flat. The damage was already done, and everyone in that studio knew they had witnessed something that would define both men's careers going forward. Behind the scenes, chaos reigned supreme. Producers were screaming into headsets, trying to figure out how to handle the situation. Social media was already exploding with clips and commentary, even though the show hadn't finished airing. The Hashtag Owen Walkout began trending within minutes, with thousands of people sharing their shock and support for Wilson's dignified exit. In the days that followed, the aftermath was swift and brutal. Video clips of the confrontation went viral across every platform, racking up millions of views within hours. The overwhelming public reaction was decisively in Wilson's favor, with celebrities, fans, and industry professionals alike condemning Kimmel's behavior as unprofessional and cruel. Jimmy Kimmel's ratings plummeted to historic lows as advertisers began pulling their sponsorships, unwilling to be associated with what many perceived as bullying behavior. The network was forced to issue multiple statements distancing themselves from the host's conduct, and rumors began circulating about potential disciplinary action or even cancellation of the show. Wilson, meanwhile, was praised universally for his grace under pressure and his refusal to engage in Kimmel's toxicity. His representatives released a simple statement: Owen Wilson conducted himself with dignity and professionalism, despite being subjected to an unprovoked personal attack. He stands by his decision to remove himself from a hostile environment. The entertainment industry rallied around Wilson, with directors, co-stars, and fellow actors publicly supporting him on social media. Many shared their own positive experiences working with Wilson, painting a picture of a generous, professional, and genuinely kind person, the complete opposite of how Kimmel had portrayed him. Within a week, 3 major studios had reached out to Wilson's representatives with new project offers, citing his unshakable integrity as exactly the kind of values they wanted associated with their brands. The confrontation that was meant to humiliate him had instead elevated his status and reinforced his reputation as one of Hollywood's most genuine personalities. The incident became a cautionary tale about the abuse of power in entertainment and the importance of treating guests with basic human respect. It sparked broader conversations about the culture of late-night television and whether hosts had become too comfortable using their platforms to tear people down for cheap laughs. For Jimmy Kimmel, the confrontation marked the beginning of the end of his reign as a beloved late-night host, his reputation forever tarnished by a night when his cruelty finally met its match in Owen Wilson's unbreakable dignity.